Hello and welcome to today's painting demonstration. I'm going to show you how to paint this coastal marsh scene, lots of fog. The goal here is to pull your eye into the back of a high contrast area here and to waft gently into the background. It's going to be like lots of foggy sky, not a lot of blue in the sky, just in the shadow tones of the trees. And there's going to be some reflective, marshy, wetland layering in the foreground here, but very little foreground, very little sky. It's going to be mostly fog. So I have my thumbnail here for your reference. If you're interested in the reference photo I'm painting from a book, I think this is the last painting from a coastal landscape book that I'm going to be referencing or becoming inspired by before I move on to photographic material. If you're interested in seeing that, it's going to be in the community Discord and the links are in the description below. So I'm going to get started with the underpainting and a large filbert brush. Picking up some burnt sienna, and I'm going to be going over the darker values first. I have a pretty detailed sketch here. I like to make sure that everything that is on the page is what I want to keep. I don't leave a lot of random first draft looking lines. The underpainting is very transparent, and I'm going to be able to use all of these guides I put in for myself until the very last layers of painting. Just picking up some more water. The same amount of paint on my brush, and I'm just gonna, that will increase the spreadability. Doing the same thing again, and the pigment is lightening up quite a bit. The reason why I do the darks first is because if they're overlapped with the following layers, it just increases the darkness of their value. More water again, and now I'm just going to pull some light tones over the water layers, and this would be the bright foggy area between our trees and up into the mountains. To apologize, I'm trying to mess with a flickery light, but I think that did it for at least now. And now our lightest values. gonna throw a little bit of yellow. In the middle of the sky. Okay. That's it for the underpainting. I'm working on a 6x6 image area on some hot press watercolor paper. If you have questions on anything that I am using, it's going to be linked in the description. I'm pulling some titanium white, and the sky really isn't very cool at all in the reference material. Maybe just a tad in the corner. So I'll just add a little bit of cerulean blue. And just a touch of the sienna. That'll give us a gray. And I'm gonna make a gradient to select from that gray color to a much lighter version. I'm going to use very scumbly brush strokes to put the fog in, and just tight little circles. That darker color is going to go up into the corners to frame the area. I'm going to pick up a little bit of a lighter color. Overlap the edges of what I put down just a moment ago. Leaving a little bit of definition while blending some edges too. Now I'm picking up closer to a white color for the middle. You see that rotating my brush revealed a lot of the blue-gray that is still on there, and that's okay. I'm going to work with that. Probably be adding some white over the top of it. This is the fog that's coming down through the mountain layers. It's also going to be overlapped and underlapped by tree shapes, which is what I'm going to be painting in next. I'm going to lay aside this filbert brush though and do myself a favor and mix the next color with the palette knife. I'm going to be using burnt sienna and cerulean blue again. I believe burnt sienna is considered a yellow. This is going to make a really muted green color. A nice gray green. And I'm going to want that to get warmer and more yellow as we come into the foreground. And then very yellow in the dead grasses in the marshy area. I will want a darker version of this color for a little bit later in the primary interest trees. And for that, I'm going to take the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue, and that is typically my darkest value color right there. I'll just need a little bit of that here and there. Okay, I think that's the colors that I'm going to be working with. I might pull a little bit from some other tones to do some adjustment, but that looks good. I think I want to use a point brush for this next step. Try out this number 4 round, and if it's too big, I can always go down a size. I don't want to go too dark with those back mountain shapes. Using short vertical brush strokes to imitate some tree shapes. It's really vague gestural tree shapes. Fade those out in the middle. Now I'm going to pull some white and blend the bottom of that mountain area. Lighter, 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 as if there's fog tucked in between the different mountains. Using more of that circular scumbling down here. Picking up just white for the middle and just mixing it in with the gray that's still on my brush. I'm bringing down some white right now into these foreground trees to remind myself how this is going to develop as we proceed into the foreground. Okay, now the next closer row of mountains is going to be a little bit darker. It's important to keep an eye on your relative value. This color I put down is a little bit darker than what I see in the reference, but I think it's going to lighten up as it dries. And I'm going to be blending the bottom of it really soon. This row of trees is a little bit closer to the foreground. It's going to be a little bit darker, and the shapes, some brush strokes, are going to be a little bit bigger to convey bigger tree shapes. They don't have to be detailed, it's just the gestures that you make need to give the impression of trees. So brush strokes that are out and then come into a center area. Okay, now I'm picking up a little bit of white and bringing it in between some of those tree shapes, those foreground tree shapes, and I'm blending it up into that mountain. Lots of wafting fog in this scene. This side is a little bit more complex. Acrylic paint dries very quickly, so I like to paint in layers so that when something does very quickly dry, as it will, just layer over that. Lots of overlapping and crisscrossing brush strokes and very light, thin layers, because I would rather it reliably dry than have some of it wet and some of it dry and not being able to really touch it until everything dries, or attempt to be mixing it, blending it in only to discover that some of it is already pretty cemented on there and not mixable. That's often disappointing. When you are painting on something that is porous, it will dry faster as well. So paper, untreated wood, anything with absorbency, your acrylic paint will dry wicked fast. Now, when I'm using these rotating scumbly brush strokes with the round brush, I'm using the brush at a 45 or more degree angle, almost parallel to the page. So sometimes using the tip and sometimes pushing the brush all the way down to get a bigger space covered. Negative shapes in these mid-ground trees. I think I'm ready to move up another layer. When this all dries, I'm going to hit this central area with a clean, thicker white. Now moving closer to the foreground, I'm going to want to warm up the color. This is coming into an olive green. This shape right here is a vague mountain. It's behind the trees of interest. It's got some bushy guys up top, but nothing really prominent. It's on the edge of our composition, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. Just get enough variation in the color. shapes on it are going to be lead lines, kind of bringing us in. Our light source, although it's foggy and diffused, is coming from the upper left. I'm going to include just a few little subtle highlights. Using the round brush because it's really good at giving me a diversity of shapes. And also some pretty good coverage. I've been moving from using the tip of the brush to the side of the brush. I also feel like if I was using a flat right now, that would be okay. I think I'm deciding to make the left side of this last clump of trees lighter than the back. It's hard because that left hill is definitely a mid-tone, so you have to make a choice to separate. These planes. Mixing some more cerulean blue and burnt sienna. Sketching in some more shapes. there is going to be a need for some negative shape painting on some of these tree forms, just give them a little bit more character and higher contrast, possibly a little bit more pull for our focal point. The fog is getting a little bit wider, closer to the ground between these trees. And now I think is the time that I switch to the smaller point brush. This is a number 1. I'm going to try to be careful where I add these shapes. You gotta pay attention to what is behind it, what's being revealed, and then also where it pulls your eye. Okay, now, the not very commonly used script brush is going to help me put in some trunks. Where did he go? There we are. I'm using a number 1 liner by Princeton. And I'm going to be using a medium warm gray. Green gray. It's going to be hard to tell exactly how light I need to make this because of the relative value. So that was too dark for that spot, so I need to brighten it up. And just go right over what I put down. That's better. It's okay if these trunks and branches are not connected to anything in particular, as long as they look like they're connected to the same tree shape. It is totally okay if they waft in and out of the background, as if they're behind some branches. going darker and moving over to the shapes on the left. The more water that is in the paint, the more transparent it will be upon drying. So you got to check back and see how things turned out in a minute or so. Going back to the small point brush, and I'm going to blend this area just a little bit more. Bring those worms a little bit further down the tree. Add them to a little bit of the tops of some neighbors. Okay, I think we're ready to move into the foreground. Gonna switch to the flat brush. I think we're using more brushes than we typically use. Got my flat, and I'm gonna add the gray first, the reflection in the water, and then I'll be painting the grassy shapes over that. Using big horizontal strokes for the water. And letting it get a little bit darker in the foreground corner. Adding a little bit more blue. It's okay to overlap the area that you plan on putting grass. So we'll just integrate the water into the seam. yellow greens. I'm gonna stick with the flat here. Going to take the vibrancy of that color down with some addition of our super dark and some white. I'm going to use the broad side of the flat brush and just push up to give the impression of little grasses. Now a layer that's more yellow and with more white. Get a little bit darker and a little bit bigger with the brush strokes as we work our way towards the foreground. Okay, now I just have the very foreground mass of clumpy grass. I'm going to make sure our darkest value is present there. Some bigger brush strokes. Okay, just a little bit more definition on some of those. Actually, you know what? Since I already have the liner dirty, I am just gonna switch over to that. And I think I'm gonna add some lighter yellows on top of that darkness. They don't need to start at the end of the page. They can appear above that bottom line as if they are mixed in. That's totally fine. Now integrating some of those lighter brush strokes in there. I'm pretty happy with that. I might add some of them over to the right side as well. Make sure that the intervals that you're adding things in is not too patterned. Because if there's one thing the human eye is good at picking up on is patterns that are like repeating, not melodic. I think those grass shapes are working out really well for us. Now I can go back and add some of those white highlights. Everything is dry in the cloud shapes. I'm going to use really clean water, get my flat brush in good shape, and I'm going to be using the side of it and just adding some really clean white hits on the to create glow in the interior of our painting. It's going to come down from this tree line, cut through those far away back trees. I'm also going to blend this into the clouds that are present already. Using the tip of my brush to put down the thick paint and then the side of my brush to blend it into what's already there. Softening some of the hard lines that are towards the edge of our painting. Just a little bit. And then a little bit of highlight on some of the water. All right. I appreciate that. I like the tree shapes, the fog that brings you up and in, and then the little reflections in the water. The underpainting did a lot of work in this piece. A lot of it is revealed through the various layers, whether it be the trees or the fog or the water reflections, and it's pushing and pulling between the cools and the warms and giving it a lot of depth and dimension. So I hope that you enjoyed this paint along today, and I look forward to doing another landscape scene tomorrow at Wednesday at 12 PST. So I look forward to see you then. And until then, happy painting.